So, Trev, let's get into this stacking up matchup. And I always love doing this. This is a fun part of this game. And you talk about how Notre Dame stacks up on paper against this Ohio State offense. And we're going to start with the run game because I think both of these teams have some very interesting run game numbers. And at times have been really good and at times have not been very good. And so when you look at this matchup, first and foremost, neither of these teams appear on paper to be great at this area of the game, right? Notre Dame ranks 41st in yards allowed rushing per game. Ohio State ranks 66th in rushing yards per game. Part of that because they do throw the ball a lot more and at least more effectively, I should say. Not a lot more because Will Howard doesn't actually throw a ton of passes. It's just because he completes over 70% of them. But their bread and butter, their yardage for offense is geared around a lot towards throwing the football. And they haven't had a 200-yard rushing game since October 5th against Iowa when they went for 203. That was their 5th game of the year. Notre Dame, on the other hand, has been a very stout rush defense of late, with the exception of the Penn State game. Now, they buckled down in the second half and performed much better, but a big reason they trailed 10-3 at halftime was because they gave up 141 rushing yards in the first half. And there have been times this year when Notre Dame has done that. But I would say that there are other numbers you look at, Trev, that show that these units are maybe a little bit better than their national ranking on just a yard standpoint would dictate. And that is, look at their yards per attempt. Notre Dame ranks 27th in the country this year, 28th, in the country this year at yards allowed per rush at 3.7. Ohio State ranks 29th in yards per rush at 3.9. And so I would say neither of these parts of the game are the strength of either unit. Notre Dame is not built on being an elite rush defense. Al Golden has said that before. I don't care about having the number one ranked rush defense in the country. There have been times, however, when it was very clear that shutting down the run was his number one priority. And when they did that, Georgia Tech, Indiana, they shut those teams down. Georgia, another great example. They shut those units down. In other games, they basically almost dared teams to run the ball. They dared Louisville to run the ball because they figured if you're running the ball, you're not throwing it to to Ja'Cory Brooks and Colin Lacey and Chris Bell. I'm curious if we see a little bit of that against Ohio State, or do they say, hey, look, we're going to have to, be more effective stopping the run because Ohio State will have no problem going on a 12-play, 75-yard drive that requires them to run the ball 9 times. At least I don't think that they will in this type of moment. So, but I do think both of these units are a little bit more dangerous, Trev, than maybe the numbers would otherwise show. I also think, and I've made this case a bunch of different times, Notre Dame's rush defense is a lot better than people think. It is based on who they've played. And what I mean by that is what we've said in the past is if you look at Notre Dame's rush defense and you take away the option teams, actually you take away all the group of 5 teams, and you just look at games where the opponent was a Power 5 team, Notre Dame all of a sudden drops down to 115.1 yards per game. That includes the game against Penn State. Amongst Power 5 teams, that ranks them 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th in college football. Their yards per rush allowed is 3.4, which ranks them around the top 10 as well. So they've been a much better team this year, Trevor, when they've, against than maybe their numbers show because of the fact that they had to play option teams. And then you look at Ohio State and you look at their games against Power 5 teams. They only rushed for 143.8 yards per game and 4.4 yards per carry. If that plays out, if that right there plays out in this game, Notre Dame will have a great opportunity to slow Ohio State down. If it looks more like the Penn State game, then it will be a much longer day for Notre Dame. But if Notre Dame's rush attack can look like it has against its Power 5 opponents to take out the triple option teams and obviously that early game against Northern Illinois, which is countered by the fact that they shut Miami of Ohio's run game down. So that kind of balances it out. But when you look at Notre Dame's games against Power 5 teams, and for the record, because there are some people that don't think Notre Dame plays very many Power 5 teams because they're an independent. They've played 11 games against Power 5 teams this year. Ohio State has played 12. One more game. And, so just keep that in mind. that ranks Notre Dame obviously much higher, Trevor. And those are huge, huge factors in this game. And where I say Notre Dame has the advantage on paper in this matchup, if that advantage carries into the game, then I think that's where Notre Dame has a shot to really keep the points down and give their offense a chance to win it.
Yeah, I said this yesterday, and Ohio State's offense is significantly more dangerous when they're able to run the football, right? And so I have to believe that one of Al Golden's top of mind priorities is preventing them from becoming a balanced offense. I don't know if this is a game where they like dare them to run. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if it's going to be like a Louisville where it's like, please run so you're not throwing it to Jeremiah Smith or Igbuka, because when this offense is at its best, it's when they're able to run the football. Not volume-wise, but from an efficient standpoint, and so that's one thing that gives me a little bit of pause with this. I mean, it's no mystery that Texas kept this a game until the very end because Ohio State as a team had 88 yards rushing. You go back through and you look what Michigan's offense did, or what Michigan's defense did, and Ohio State really couldn't get anything going on the ground. And so, to me, I look at what Notre Dame's numbers are from a Power 5 perspective, because, we say it, feel like, and I know you know this too, it feels like you and I say this every single week, where we kind of have to add the little asterisk of, hey, remember they played 2 triple option teams, and respectively to both of them, and they held Army over 100 yards under their average, and they held Navy like 25, 26 yards under their average.
And so, a chunk of that they got some yards late in the game.
Yeah.
A couple big runs, right?
Yep. Blake Horvath got like 75 of that 224 on one run, I believe. And so, it's just, not to take it away, not saying that it doesn't count, but yeah, you go back through, and Notre Dame's run defense is significantly better than what it looks like. And same could be said for Ohio State, because when they do choose to run the ball, they average 5 yards per carry through 15 games. I mean, that's noteworthy, right? That ranks them inside of the top 30 in the country. But, they're not a crazy explosive rushing offense. They have 7 runs of 30 yards or more. I would almost be willing to bet a good amount of money that all those belong to Trevian Henderson, right? And so, this is a team that doesn't allow a whole lot of negatives in the rush game, or just a whole lot of negatives in total. I mean, they rank top 10 in the country in tackles for loss allowed. But for me, when this offense wants to, they can be an efficient rushing offense. Notre Dame is going to have to do everything they can to make them a one-dimensional team, because, it's for a different reason than what the Ohio State defense is talking about, right? For them, we have to make Notre Dame throw it, because that makes them, then they would be playing into what is not the strength of their offense. I still believe that the strength of Ohio State's offense is throwing the football, right? Because of the weapons that they have on the perimeter. But it's when Will Howard is able to run play action. It's when he's able to have a ground game behind him, right? That's what makes this offense so dangerous. That's when Chip Kelly can go into his bag. But if Notre Dame's able to stop the run, they can pin their ears back. And the secondary is still the strength of Notre Dame's defense consistently over the course of the season. That makes me feel a lot more confident, opposed to if Ohio State, Trevian Henderson, Quinshon Judkins are just starting to rip off 4, 5, 8, 12, 6 at a time.
Which is what Penn State did in the first half.
Right.
And that's what allowed them to eat up a ton of clock. And Notre Dame's offense could never really get into a rhythm, because Penn State was moving the ball and just keeping the ball in the first half. And that played a big role, in my opinion, Trevor, and why Notre Dame did struggle at times in that game, because they
Bryan, we might have lost you, or my computer's messing up. I don't know if you can hear me. From the sound of the chat, it sounds like you might have froze. Regardless, I guess as they say, the show goes on. And Bryan will probably be back here in just a second. So, with that being said, Ohio State's rushing attack gives them the opportunity to be a dual threat offense, right? And I think the thing that is that gives me a lot of pause is what Notre Dame did against Penn State. It was a tale of two different halves, like we had said before, right? And Penn State started to be able to gash Notre Dame on the ground. They started going for 8 at a time. Like they had 141 rushing yards in the first half. And that is something that you can't afford Ohio State to do. Because if they're able to do that, this becomes a much taller task. I know some of the stats went away, and I have some of them up right now. But, and I'm sorry that you guys can't see them. But if you go through and you look, like I said before, TreVeyon Henderson doesn't have any games where he's gone over 100 yards. But what he's done is he's been very, very, very efficient in these games, right? I mean, against Marshall, he averaged 12.6 yards per carry. Against Purdue, he averaged 14.1 yards per carry. Against Michigan State, he averaged 9.8 yards per carry. Against Oregon, the kid averaged 11.7 yards per carry. So he's almost at 12 yards a carry in those games. And so when you go through and you look at how they use him, it's unmatched, right? I'm very high on Notre Dame's running back room. I'm very high on Ohio State's. I was very high on Penn State's. And Notre Dame in the first half of the Penn State game was not able to. They were not able to shut him down in the slightest. And so it's going to come down to that because everybody knows how dangerous Ohio State is on the perimeter, which leads us into the next matchup, right? It leads us into the passing game matchup. And of course, I don't have the numbers up with me, so I apologize there. But it's going to be the Notre Dame pass defense versus the Ohio State pass offense, right? I do have some numbers up. I don't know if I'm going to be able to share them with you guys, so give me just a second here. But it goes without saying, Ohio State, I believe, has the best receiving core in the country, and I'm pretty sure a good amount of people in the chat can agree with that as well. I know Archer will. I know Archer and Mr. Bucknuts will. But it's for good reason. They have the deepest receiving room, I think, in college football. But again, they have the numbers to back it up. So give me just a second while I get these pulled up here. So Ohio State this year, and you guys are just going to have to get the listening ears on because I'm sorry I can't show this to you. But actually, I might be able to. Give me just a second. Let's see if I can do this. No, I cannot. Apologies. But Ohio State, from a passing game perspective, they rank 25th in the country. They average 265.1 yards per game. But again, the numbers that we always pay attention to is efficiency. And they average 9.2 yards per attempt, which ranks them 4th in the country. So not only do they pass for a good amount of yards per game, what they're able to do is they are very efficient with how they do it. I believe they average over 14 yards per completion, which I also believe to be ranked inside of the top 5 in the country. They rank number 3 overall in quarterback rating at 170. That's 3rd in the country. And they're 13th in the country in sacks allowed. They've only allowed 14 sacks this year for 92 yards. When you go and you start looking at the Notre Dame defensive side of it, Notre Dame's pass defense, again, ranks very elite in the country. And again, they are one of the top pass defenses in the country. So they rank 2nd in yards per game at 165.3. That ranks them 2nd in the country. They rank, I think Brian might be coming back. There we go. Thank you, Brian. Notre Dame's pass defense ranks 3rd in the country in yards per attempt at 5.8. And they rank 43rd in the country in yards per completion. They are the number 1 team in the country in completion percentage allowed, which I believe them at being 50.7, they had just crossed over the threshold of allowing over 50% completion because for the better half of the season, they ranked under 50%. They haven't allowed a whole lot of passing touchdowns this season. They rank inside of the top 15. They've only allowed 12 passing touchdowns. And they're one of the best defenses in the country at forcing interceptions. They have 19 on the year, which ranks them top 5. When you go and you break down pass efficiency defense, they are the number 1 pass efficiency defense in college football. And they have done a decent job at generating pressure. They have 38 sacks on the season, which does rank them inside of the top 40. But it's going to be, again, like we talked about throughout the rest of the show, getting home on Will Howard is something that has to be top of mind. because when he has shown at times throughout this season that when he is pressured, he will turn the football over. He becomes a less efficient passer. Some of those numbers on the right-hand side don't look as gleaming when he is under pressure. Right, they're very efficient passing offense. The passer rating on the year averages 169.9, which ranks them third in the country. But you go through and you look at the games, like I said before, you look at the games where Will Howard hasn't performed the best. His passer rating has I don't want to call it a steep drop off, but it is a drop off in efficiency in comparison to what he is when he is protected the proper way. Right. So these are the numbers here. A lot of them speak for themselves, and it's what you would expect from the two highlighted areas of this game. Right. You have I don't think the run game is being talked about enough personally. Excuse me, if you ask me, but this is kind of the highlight of it, right? This is the, albeit what you want to call like the preview for the big games. So you have the Notre Dame secondary on one hand, you have the Ohio State receivers on the other hand, and it's exactly what was talked about in 2023. And to me, again, it will still come down to who wins in the big moments, because last year it was Ohio State in those key moments on that final drive of the game where Igbuka goes down and he has a really good final drive. Kyle McCord was able to convert 3rd and 10, 3rd and 19, 4th and 7. And, the list goes on, and we know what that's about. But welcome back, Bryan. Just covering the Notre Dame passing game time.
You're going to have to kind of keep rolling on this because our internet went out because of the storm. I don't know if you guys can even hear me now. So I'm connected on my phone. So I have like almost no connection right now. Can you guys hear me okay right this second? Or is it bad?
The audio's good. The video's a little laggy, but we can hear you.
All I care about is the audio. If the audio starts going out, let me know.
Okay.
But yeah, we just got an alert that our internet is down in the area, so we're trying to get that fixed. So, but anyway, keep going, man. I mean, you're doing a great job of breaking down. This is the dangerous part of that team. I mean, if they beat Notre Dame, barring it being a game like last year, 17-14, then it's going to be another example of you couldn't stop their pass. It's going to be an example of you couldn't stop their pass game. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And I know, like, it was great to shut down the Penn State receivers last week, and you're not going to shut down these receivers like that. But they also don't have, with all due respect to G. Scott and their other tight ends, Jelani Thurman and those other guys, they don't have a Tyler Warren either. They do have talented backs in the pass game like Penn State had. So, but it comes down to Drew Aller could never get comfortable in that game, and they've got to make sure that the same thing happens with Will Howard. Because if you look at it, Trev, the number that sticks out, 25, 4, 4, 5, 3, 9, 10. What's the one number that sticks out? Interceptions. Now, I know they played more games, but you look at the games that he has struggled this year, that Will Howard has struggled, or the offense has struggled. That's been a big part of it. That inability to consistently move the ball and make those plays in the pass game, but also more importantly, the turnover. Now, he didn't throw a turnover against Oregon, but he had a bad turnover early against Iowa, which slowed down that offense. He threw 2 picks against Michigan in that game. You look at the Texas game, he's 10.7 per attempt against Tennessee, 12.3 per attempt against Oregon. But despite completing over a 7 percentage point higher completion percentage against Texas compared to Oregon, he was down 3.5 yards per attempt at 8.8, which is still pretty good. But that was bolstered huge by a 75-yard catch and run. Now, I'm not one of those people that's like, well, if you take that play out of the game, they didn't play that well. Well, that was a big part of the game. So I'm not saying this is like, hey, take that part away. But I am saying that outside of that, they were only 6.7 yards per attempt. And he had no other touchdowns and a pick in that part. And that's going to be the big key, is when that's happening, then Notre Dame has a shot. Did you get to the Notre Dame side yet, or were you just on the Ohio State part looking at that?
I was kind of covering both at the same time. Conversation was going a little bit hand in hand. So, but yeah, I mean, it was, I agree. Again, it's what I talked about a lot of was getting pressure on Will Howard has to be top of mind, because we've seen it at other points throughout this season, right? When Notre Dame's pass rush isn't able to get home, quarterbacks like a Jaden Maeva have had one. He had a really good game. I'm not trying to take that away from the kid at USC, right? I'm not going to say, well, he had a good game because Notre Dame sucked that day. Maeva had some really good throws that game, in my opinion. Like you always hear that old saying of there's no defense for a perfect throw, and he made a couple of those. Now, there were also a lot of mistakes on Notre Dame's end that we've talked about before too, right? But that was a game where the pass rush wasn't able to get home. And up until late in the game, they weren't able to get pressure on Maeva. And then when they did, they had back-to-back pick sixes. You know what I mean? And so that's just going to be some of the differences that have to be the key. I mean, Notre Dame in 2023 did a really good job of getting pressure on Kyle McCord up until the final drive. And Kyle McCord was able to sit back. He picked the defense apart and drove him right down the field and scored a touchdown with 1 second left on the clock. And so getting home is going to be imperative because those two things go hand in hand for me when we talk about Notre Dame's pass defense. And the numbers correlate. You know, I mean, Notre Dame holds teams to 165.3 passing yards per game. It's second in the country. But it's not just because, like, they didn't do to Penn State what they did to, like, all of their other opponents, right? It's not like that at all. They've had games where they've generated a lot of pressure. You know, I mean, they eliminate, well, not eliminate. They don't allow that many big plays. They rank, again, they have 12 passing plays of 30 yards or more. They've also played 15 games, you know, so you kind of take those numbers with both of these teams into account, like you alluded to earlier. But
yeah, it's less than one per game.
Yeah.
And I could point to at least 2 or 3 that were made, like the Purdue 50-yard gain was made against the backups. That was the play where Kennedy Urlacher took out Jaden Mickey. One of the best hits of the year. Unfortunately, it's against your own player. You know, we've had a couple, you know, the late throw to Malachi Fields against Virginia. But you know what's one of the more fascinating statistics for Ohio State is how they rank 4th in completion percentage in the country. They rank 9th with most passing plays of 30 yards or more, yet they only rank 35th in yards per completion. The reason why is that Will Howard completes a lot of passes at the line, behind the line, or right past the line of scrimmage. And what that does is that allows his receivers to make a lot of plays. And so when you look at like Will Howard's distribution of passes this year, he's completed, you know, PFF has him down for 291 completions. See, 25 of those were 20 yards or more down the field. It's a small percentage. At 10.9%, 23.9% of his throws were 10 to 19 yards down the line of scrimmage. 43% were less than 10, and 16.9% were behind the line, at or behind the line of scrimmage. And so what they do, and what I think is smart, Trev, is that they allow their receivers to make more plays. And I think that they don't put Will Howard in as many downfield situations. I mean, if you look at it, as I just said, what was the number I said? It was 50. What was it? 58 deep balls. What was the number that I gave that one?
I thought it was like 44, like deep passes thrown this season.
Yeah, 44. You're correct. That's in 15 games. CJ Stroud threw 61 in 13 games in 2022. Now, again, that's CJ Stroud. You get the point that I'm making.
Right.
They 29.7% of their throws were 30 yards or were between 10 and 19. So that's a total of, let's see here, 45.3. And it was obviously a part of their offense that they used a lot more 2 years ago. And it's not just because of the quarterback difference, but I think the quarterback difference is part of it, because they're just, and I think it's smart. They're not putting Will Howard in as many deep shot opportunities. I mean, last year, if you look at Kyle McCord, he threw 48 deep shots in 13 games. So now the difference is I think Will Howard's completing them at a higher rate too. Yeah. Because they're more targeted with their deep shots. It's not just, hey, we're just coming out throwing bombs. It's, we see something in your defense where we think we can take a one-on-one shot. We're going to take it. And then Will Howard, when he has time, has been a very accurate deep ball thrower this year. The 2 balls he threw against Nebraska were dimes. I think Now, Jeremiah Smith was wide open, but Carnell Tate, the backside post route, that's a really good throw. I mean, that's just a really good ball over top of the defense. And so, but it is interesting that they rank 9th in plays of 30 yards or more and 4th in completion percentage, but only rank 35th in yards per completion. That's a very fascinating. But that stat also matters because the one thing Notre Dame has done is at times give up more yards per catch. Yep. They both have a very weird statistic in that regard.
Yeah.
That makes it very interesting. But I think that completion percentage battle is one that I'm going to keep my eye on. Completion percentage and yards per attempt. Yards per attempt is, if you want to know the biggest number that I'm going to be focused on in that game, Trev, it's going to be yards per attempt. And that means two things in this matchup. Number one, Notre Dame is rallying to the football and limiting yards after the catch. Something they did not do a good job of in the first half against Ohio State last year. I can think of off the top of my head 3 or 4 third down conversions in the first half that where guy got hit 4 or 5 yards short of the first down marker and they just missed.
Yeah.
Can't have that. Got to tackle well. But
especially after last game against Penn State, got to tackle well. Like when all those factors on the table has to happen. Sorry.
No, you're good, man. This is part of the conversation. And then the other part of it too is if you're forcing more completions, that's going to lower the yard per attempt as well. And that's why the completion percentage matters to me. Now, look, Will Howard is most likely going to go well over what Notre Dame allows in completion percentage. Notre Dame's given up 50.7. His lowest number of the season is 57.6. That was against Michigan. That's the nature of their offense. I mean, when you're talking about an offense that throws over 50% of their passes less than 10 yards down the line of scrimmage, you're going to complete those at a higher rate, much higher rate. And of those throws, he's completing over 80% of his throws. He's, and that's Kyle McCord's number. Will Howard, I think, is actually a little bit higher than that. But the point is, Trev, is that you've got to be able to, if you can take away the quick stuff or limit the effectiveness and force him to throw the ball down more in contested situations, that's where Notre Dame's going to do a better job of forcing incompletions. And then also, if you can pressure the quarterback and get him out of the pocket, maybe get some throwaways, that helps too. And I think those are going to be big parts of it. Because like Drew Aller was another guy that had a very high completion percentage coming into that game. And Notre Dame was able to keep him in check and keep him around 50% throwing the football in that game. And they've been able to do that to several offenses this season. But as we said before, he didn't have Jeremiah Smith and guys like that. But Drew Aller ended the season at 66.7% completion rate, which is really good. Obviously, he was higher than that going into the Notre Dame game. I believe he was. Let's just look at the numbers. I mean, I think he was, close to 67. I'm just pulling up the numbers now here real quick. So he had 371 attempts on the season. So 250 divided by 371. He was at 67.4 coming into the game. Notre Dame held him to 52.2. Now the difference is, there have been several performances like that from Will Howard. He was at about 52 against Boise. He was at 51 against Oregon. A lot of his numbers were kind of from, dominating against 89% against Purdue, 81% against Kent State. Whereas when you look at Will Howard has some games where he had a higher completion rate against better teams. He was at 82.8 against Tennessee, 65.4 against Oregon, 84.6 against Indiana. But, I think if you can keep the yards down and keep the yards per attempt low, because he completed 84.6 against Indiana, but he completed 7.7 yards per attempt. If you can keep him below 8 yards per attempt, you got a pretty good shot at keeping this offense in check. Because that either means no deep balls, or B, maybe they hit a deep ball, but then you have a lot of incompletions and -2s because you're rallying, and a lot of +2s because you're rallying to that quick game and shutting them down. I think that factors into it as well.
Yeah, it's going to be keeping everything in front of you. I mean, Ohio State's receivers, for as much credit as we give them for their downfield playmaking ability, they are also good after the catch. There's a reason why they're given 6'3" Jeremiah Smith true freshman 6'3", 215 end arounds. Like there's reasons why they're giving him jet sweeps. And we saw it last year too. They're willing to do anything that they can to get the ball into the hands of Emeka Egbuka. So yeah, it's all different things that Notre Dame is going to have to be prepared for. I think that's one of the reasons why, their yards per completion ranks lower, but they have like 30 or 27 pass plays of 30 yards or longer. Some of it's their after the catch ability too. So yeah, man, I mean, it's going to be one that everything has to be kept in front of you, and tackling, I mean, little spoiler alert here, but especially after the performance against Penn State, tackling is almost going to be my number one key to victory for the defense, because it's just, you can't have plays like that, like you did against Penn State. Because if you're missing tackles on guys like Jeremiah Smith in the open field, if you're missing tackles like guys on Travion Henderson in the open field, they could go. Right? Like that's kind of the offset for me of they don't have a Tyler Warren at tight end, but Notre Dame, even though they were missing tackles on Tyler Warren, there was always somebody that was close to rally around and bring him down a couple yards after contact. I don't know if you're going to get that opportunity with Travion Henderson. I don't know if you're going to get that opportunity with Jeremiah Smith. So it's going to be one where tackling is going to be huge for the secondary. They're going to have to bring their A game on Monday for sure. Absolutely for sure.
I also want to point out, Trevor, little statistic, because I know that there's some in the Ohio State fandom that will make this statement. Well, Notre Dame's pass defense isn't as good as our pass defense because they play Navy team. They play option teams. That's very true. Notre Dame held both of their option opponents to less than 100 yards this season. But I also want to point out that if you only look at Power 5 games, so that means no option teams, Notre Dame still ranked 5th amongst Power 5 teams in yards allowed per game. Notre Dame also allowed their Power 5 opponents to pass for 5.8 yards per play, which is exactly what they did on the season.
Yeah.
So their yards per attempt this season against Power 5 opponents was identical to what it was, and it was still number 1 in college football amongst Power 5 teams. Against Power 5 opponents, they gave up 11 passing touchdowns and still had 16 interceptions in 11 games against Power 5 opponents. So no option teams included, neither of the MAC teams included. If you look at quarterback efficiency against only Power 5 opponents, Notre Dame had the number 1 pass defense in college football. Number 2 was Texas. Number 3 was BYU. Number 4 was Ohio State. So I just want to point out, and I'm talking about, we've said this before, of other Power 5 teams, because like Florida Atlantic's number 1, they played 1 game against Power 5 team. UAB played 1. So I'm looking against other Power 5 teams where they actually had to play a Power 5 only schedule. So I just want to point that out. Notre Dame's completion percentage allowed against Power 5 only teams is 52.1. Again, still number 1 in college football among Power 5 teams against other Power 5 opponents. Only Old Dominion, who played 2 games, UAB in 1 game, Florida Atlantic in 1 game, were higher. So Notre Dame's stats don't change when you look at where they rank amongst other Power 5 teams. So, and we held they held Penn State to 135 yards passing. They held Texas A&M to 100 yards passing. They held Purdue to $124. They held Stanford to 87. They held Florida State to 88. They held Indiana to 215, and the vast majority of that came in the fourth quarter when Notre Dame was up 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Over 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, Curtis Rourke had under 100 yards passing, I'm pretty sure. He had like 90-something yards passing going into the fourth quarter.
That's right.
Let me also, just to continue to add to your point, Brian, yes, Notre Dame played 2 service academies this year. The 2 service academies rank 132 and 134 respectively in passing yards per game. Who's 131? Michigan.
Yes, there you go.
Do you know who's 130? Iowa. Do you know who's 113th? Purdue, common opponent.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can go through and we can play this game all day, right? Of Ohio State's pass defense is better because they didn't have to play, or they didn't play service academy schools to bump up their stats. I mean, Michigan had 62 yards passing. I don't want to hear it, right? And yes, part of that was also because Ohio State has a very good defense.
Yes, we're not challenging that Ohio State has an elite secondary.
Right.
We're saying they do.
Right.
We're pushing back on the notion that, Notre Dame doesn't. And it's because it's one of those really lazy arguments that you don't hear. Like you'll never hear Archer make that argument.
Right.
You'll never hear him make that argument because he's in our show all the time. He understands what this, but you hear that a lot more than you should.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And so now Ohio State also did a great job against Indiana.
Yes, they did.
With their pass defense. They also did a great job against Purdue with their pass defense. And that's kind of the point. They both did a great job shutting those teams down. But Ohio State also has given up a lot of passing yards their last couple games. Why? Because they played better opponents who had to throw the ball a lot because Ohio State had leads on them. I mean, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they aren't good at throwing the football. Them giving up 283 yards passing to Texas does not mean that Ohio State doesn't have a good pass defense. They held them to 7.3 yards per attempt. That's why I say those are the numbers that matter more than total yards. It's that number right there is, can Notre Dame keep Ohio State under 8, and can their offense get to 8? That's going to be a big key in the game if you're looking at it from a Notre Dame defense standpoint. I mean, look, Ohio State's offense passed for 289 yards. Texas's offense passed for 283 yards. Texas passed for 2 touchdowns. Ohio State passed for 1 touchdown. Here's a big difference. Ohio State averaged 8.8 yards per pass attempt. Texas averaged 7.3. Now you say, well, yeah, a lot of that was on one play. Exactly. Because Ohio State's pass offense was able to generate that big play that changed the game, and Texas couldn't.
Yep.
That's what that means. That doesn't mean, well, if you take that away, Ohio State didn't do a whole lot. No, it means they were able to make the big play. And because here's the thing, fluky touchdowns count for as many points as regular touchdowns. I learned that when I was growing up playing football. Did you know that? Were you aware of that? Just like passing touchdowns for a quarterback count as much as a quarterback rushing for a touchdown to count the same amount of points.
At least I've heard. That's what I've heard.
Right.
That is what I've heard. And also, like, at the end of the half, fluky maybe. That was also a great play call.
Great play call. And a great run. Great blocking downfield by the Ohio State lineman, and Travion Henderson did a great job.
Fantastic. I mean, the offensive line was in a position where they were running full speed before Travion even caught the football.
Right.
Like, fluky touchdown to me is like Hail Mary. Like, what do you remember the Ole Miss Bama game where Chad Kelly got hit and he just threw it in the air, the ball got tipped up, and then
it tipped up and then went forward, and the Ole Miss guy ran underneath it. Yes,
right. Like, that to
fluky
me,
touchdown is returning a kick, a missed field goal,
right?
109 yards for a touchdown. Yes,
right. Like a fluky touchdown. Like, I understand. Like, there's a difference between improbable and fluky. Like, odds of Travion going to the house off of a 75-yard screenplay are slim. It's obviously not 0. And it was a great play call. It was one of those that was set up to literally just be like, well, we'll see what he gets out of this.
That's why you give your playmakers the ball in that situation and don't just take a knee.
Yes.
Look, like, let's see if we can crease one and then get in. And that's where I think that play call was better than what Bobo did late in the second half against Notre Dame.
Yeah.
He dropped back. Let's drop back, try to throw one down the field, and then Notre Dame gets that big pressure. Ohio State's not going to make that same mistake. They're going to say, hey, let's get the ball outside to Travion. Let's run a little tunnel screen to Emeka. Let's do something where maybe we try to run a little screen to Jeremiah and try to get one. And if we get one, then you can drop back and maybe take some shots down the field. And Ohio State does that a ton. You're going to see anytime you get into sort of a gotta score situation, whether they're down, whether there's not a lot of time left on the clock, whenever Ohio State gets into we need to make a big play, there's a good chance you're going to see a screen to Travion. A very good chance you're going to see a screen. And you know what I call that, Trevor? Good play calling.
Yeah.
Get your most dynamic player the football in space. Who knew? Who knew that that's a great idea? And that's something Mike Denbrock's done a pretty good job of this year, and that's something that Chip Kelly's done a really good job of later in the season. And I think that was a big change to what has really led to this offense being more effective in the postseason compared to where it was in the regular